Today's episode of Cowboy Crossroads is sponsored by my friends at Republic Boot Company in Houston, Texas. Republic Boot Company specializes in hand-built, custom-made boots made from the finest materials. They've made cowboy boots for folks like Gary P. Nunn, Robert Earl Keene, Joel Nelson, and my wife. They also do other custom leather projects like belts, spur straps, holsters, knife sheaths, guitar straps. You name it, and they can build it. Look them up and tell them I sent you. You can check them out at republicbootcompany.com. If you're enjoying the podcast and would like to help me keep it going, you can become a patron of Cowboy Crossroads by going to patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. Patreon is a platform that allows you to offer monthly support to creations that you enjoy, and in return you get access to some exclusive content. Check it out at patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. That's patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. When I was interviewing today's guest, I asked him to read his poem entitled The West. He opened his book to that piece and said, "Why don't you read this one?" So, at Baxter's request, I will. This is The West by Baxter Black. They don't call it Death Valley for nothing, and coyotes don't make a good pet. But living out here with the grizz and the deer, you pretty much take what you get. And the Rockies have shoulders like granite. They're big and they make their own rules. So take what you need, but you better pay heed, 'cause the mountains don't tolerate fools. And the wind is the moan of the prairie that haunts and bedevils the plains, the soul-stealing kind that can fray a man's mind till only his whimper remains. You can stand in the canyon's cathedral where water and sky never rest, and know in your bones that the meek on their own will never inherit the West. It's wild and it's wide and it's lonesome, where the dream of first blood still survives, and it beckons to those who can bid adios to the comfort of 8 to 5 lives. So come, all you brave caballeros, cinch up and reach down inside till you feel the heat, then take a deep seat. 'Cause the West, boys, she ain't broke to ride. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is Baxter Black. If you haven't already, I'd recommend going back to the last episode and listening to the first part of my interview with Baxter. I first met Baxter Black in 2002 during my second trip to the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada. Back in those days, Baxter would only do one show during the gathering. It was usually on a Saturday afternoon in the main auditorium, and I had the good fortune of being scheduled to open for Baxter that year. I recall that he insisted that I wear his wristwatch on stage to ensure that I did not go over my allotted time. After the show, he gave me a copy of his latest book and signed it with this inscription: "For Andy, thanks for having me on your program, Baxter Black." In writing about cowboy poetry, Baxter Black has said this: "My world is one in which people have a lot of wrecks. Cow wrecks, horse wrecks, financial wrecks, flood, fire, and drought wrecks. Laughing at our wrecks seems to make the tribulations of our lifestyle easier to handle." Here's Baxter Black.
the word poetry is used more often when they're saying it's almost as good as poetry, but they don't know what that is. My class or my desire, I know who they are, and I know where they come from. I've been to their place. Boy, I covered the country. You want to talk about sheep, you want to talk about horses, chutes, trucks, whatever the ag world is, I can always have an opinion. The different areas that I'm in are different, in that the Midwest doesn't care a whole lot about branding. The cow itself is my audience, and the cowboy is along for the ride.
I heard you say one time that cowboy poetry is about wrecks. I think you told me that on the phone.
Yes, definitely. It is. And the cowboy always gets the brunt. And there's something about that. Of course, you would say, oh, you must be making fun of them. But I can tell you the difference. I'm them. If you want to insult me, I know how to do it. The very first poem I can remember writing, I was in Utah. I was going down this into this big valley on the southeast of Idaho, the road that goes to Utah. And we had cows down there. And I was about halfway up the mountain where the boss was living. And I saw the cowboys gathering, and I would guess we easily were a mile away because the horses were real tiny. I looked down there, and here's all these cowboys, or a handful, and I could see the cows coming. They were gathering the cows. They're gathering the cows that I was going to preg check when I got down the mountain. And I just stopped and looked. It was beautiful, and it was so silent. Someplace that big shouldn't be that silent, but it was. And I could hear it and no wind, and parked my deal, and got out and leaned on the fender, and I could hear the cowboys driving the cows in. Yeah. And the bunch, the way the bunch looks, it looked like a raindrop that's kind of curly, and that was the cows curling into the gate like this in the corral. And I was just watching this peacefully, and suddenly I saw the raindrops, the point crash. It's just like you dropped a raindrop on, and they started like this, and it was the cows. They just got right down here to the gate, and I realized what had happened probably, but I could hear it real quiet. Get out of there, you no good son of a... Get that one. It was the dogs. Their dogs got in the front of the cows, scatter the cows this way, and you can hear, get in the pickup, you... And I don't, speed is not an interest. I really wrote that fast. For some, it just came into my head. It's a short little poem. I got down there and here, let me tell you a little poem. So I wrote this, or I wrote the poem on the way down, I guess. And it was 5 or 6 verses, and the last line is, and it's really cussing the dogs, because that's what happened. Everybody there brings his own dog, which is in the code, you can't criticize another man's dog. You don't mess with his hat. There are some things that are just off limits. And to cuss another man's dog or a horse is kind of sacred. But when I got down there and I told this story, every one of those cowboys who had chased his dog back into the truck said, yeah, I know a guy like that.
From the late 1980s through the early 2000s, Baxter Black was a regular voice on National Public Radio's Morning Edition. In writing about his association with NPR, Baxter has said this: I appreciate and value my association with NPR and my acceptance by its listeners who are mostly from outside my world. As to why I am included, I can only quote one of the producers who, when I asked him why I was on Morning Edition, replied, "Because you're the only one we know from out there."
What is my motto? You're working out of the box, and you need to have as many arrows in the sky as you can get them. And that was a perfect example. We live in Colorado. Yellowstone was on fire. It's 1984. It was just like now, but even worse. Yellowstone's burning. You could see smoke in the air. And so I wrote maybe, in response, range fire, lightning crossed off the sky like veins on the back of your hand. And I wrote that going from Boise to Grandview, which was I lived in Grandview. And the mountains run east and west right across there. And I've forgotten their name. But I saw it all the way home driving out to the feedlot. I was living at the feedlot. And you could just see it. And I held that one line in my mind maybe 10 years. And then I wrote that poem. And so I looked up public radio and the address. And I just recorded it. You've seen my little studio. I recorded it, and in those days it was reels, and so I got it done on a tape, and I sent it to whom it may concern or whatever, and I just sent it. And if you think what that letter had to get through to get to somebody that was responsible or could do something. It's got to get through the mailroom, and a lot of people just have business people. They just have stuff that, we can see that's not real, so we'll throw it away. So this deal got back there, and it went through there. Finally somebody said, well, what is it? Well, I don't know, it's a tape. Well, who's he? I don't know. Let's hear that. So I would guess it went through 4 or 5 or 6 people without even listening to say, well, somebody listened to that. And they did, and they called me back up, or I had my address there, and he called me up, and I'm from NPR. Did you write that? I said, yes, I did. Is that you talking? Yes, it's me. Well, okay, can we use it on public radio, the big national show? That's who I'm calling. I said, sure. So I did. The next week after it ran, we got, I can remember, 70 some odd letters to them, and they sent them to me. And that was a nice response for somebody like me. And he called back and he said, do you have any other of those? And I'd already published, I think, 3 soft-cover books. So that's how I got on public radio, and it was a wonderful thing. I've never had any but one of the girlfriends on my 4 years of running around. And she heard me on the radio. And she was from Portland, I think. Very liberal, and I didn't care. That's not an issue, and usually in my world. And she said, what are you doing on our station? But public radio was good to me.
In the years after the first Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada in 1985, Johnny Carson began featuring cowboy poets on The Tonight Show. Baxter Black appeared 6 times between 1985 in 1992. Baxter has written this about the experience. I was on The Tonight Show several times, as were other cowboy poets. To my knowledge, none of us ever used a teleprompter.
Johnny Carson called in 1983 and said, somebody recommended you. So I sent him the tape. They said, you got anything to send? Yeah, I'll send you. Just made my first cassette. And I got a letter 2 days later that, I'm sorry, we can't use you. You're just too cowy. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I'm persistent. And their mistake was giving me their phone number. And so I got to banging on them, and every time I turned, I had all the famous people I knew write them and say, yeah, he's good, or give me a plug. And then Alco comes. And Johnny Carson's coming to Elko. And so they called Elko, but they called Hal was running the place, and the poetry gathering had already began, maybe a couple of years. And that was earlier than that, maybe the first year, because it was made such a big deal. I'm sure they called and said, who can you recommend to come on the Johnny Carson show? And so he probably recommended me, or somebody did. And they called me up from Johnny Carson, and they already knew me because I had pestered them enough. And they said, well, are you a cowboy? And I said, well, I'm a veterinarian, and I'm in the cow business, and I rodeo and rope. Well, you do go out and gather up cows? Well, when they bring them in, then I work with those. So you aren't a cowboy. This isn't something I worry about, but it is always a contention. And she said, well, okay, we don't need you. We want a cowboy. And there was plenty of them there, I'm guessing. Another year, another plastering them. Second year, are you a cowboy? No, I told you, I'm a cowboy poet. That's what I am. That's how I make a living. Well, we want a real cowboy. I said, okay, that's not me. And I do that in respect for, I know real cowboys, and they are on a horse with a rope or running a ranch. They're the people that have the right to call themselves that. I'm just somebody who works for them. So I said no. And third year came around. Now it's 1987. They called up from and I knew the people personally because they had turned me down 3 or 4 years before. And they'd been asking me, we need a roper. Can you tell us where we get a roper? And I told them. And they said, are you ready? I said, yes. And the deal is, do you know the system here now? If you had an agent, we'd have got you on like that. So when you're riding out of the box, and I do it purpose because I don't like people giving me directions. I think that's my basic deal. I've turned down all kinds of things that I don't regret, that you would think, my gosh, they want you on a movie? Well, they just called to see if I want to be a part of one. And I said, well, what kind of movie is it? Well, it's a Western. Send me the script. And then they sent it to me, and my rules, personal rules, is, like I told you can't be on stage drunk, and you can't cuss. And everything I write has to be something like that you can take your aunt to. And everybody has their own convictions, and mine is to keep my audience. They are me. They're my family. You don't take awards. My awards is to go out on the road and fly to someplace out in the middle of nowhere and have, how about Union Junction in South Dakota. There's only 3 people in town. And that's the biggest crowd I ever had in South Dakota. They came from everywhere. I think we had 1,100 people come to a barbecue, and they had a big tent that we had to go out and build around it. And now, that's my payment. That's my deal. So here we're on the movie. And so I read it, and I said, well, it's just, I don't think well, it's a Western. Well, it's not really. Well, it is. That's just where it is. And I didn't argue with him. I said, I don't think I'm going to do that, but if these people are calling from New York, and I said, well, listen, if you ever have a Western that's, doesn't have to be R-rated, give me a call. So you know what the movie was? No Country for Old Men. Won the Oscar for Best Film. And I lost not a tear because I wouldn't be comfortable there anyway. One of my poems has the line, you just can't see them from the road. And that's been stolen many a time. Sometimes it works. Ram trucks. They were trying to get words to advertising with, and here came Guts and Glory. And I listened to that a few times, and I said, wonder whether they got that. And it took me a long time to get through the outside of those people if you're not in with them. And this is even Dodge. And so I finally got to everyone up there giving me the shove off. And finally got to the art part of the company. I said, where'd you, the designers, marketing people, I said, how'd you get that slogan? That's pretty good. Yeah, it was in a movie, 8 seconds, and this was just a poem. And I said, well, you know who wrote it? No, I don't know. It was in that movie, and somebody just said this ought to be a good slogan for us. And well, I said, I wrote that, if it means anything. So, Guts and Glory. Poems take a life of their own. I wrote The Legacy of Rodeo Man. I wrote it to open the rodeo in the Agribition in Saskatchewan. And a guy called up and said, we should open our rodeo. And I said, well, it's not the way my stuff works. I'm funny, and I'm a little dot down here in the middle, and 3,000 people. Well, figure something out. We want you to come up and do that. And I'm thinking, I'll go up there and do Healer. And then I got to where I said, well, I'll try to do this. I never write poems for people. For your funerals, or I just said, I got some here, I'll let you use it, but I don't do personal like that, or you kill yourself. So, this rodeo we got up, and I was involved with the PRCA and the Canadian Rodeo, and just as a telling stories, I said, all right, I got to work, and I wrote A Legacy of a Rodeo Man. And I read it to him and said, hell, that's pretty good. But I said, but I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. Well, figure it out and come. So here's what I figured out, and they did it for me. When the rodeo is 2 minutes before starting, I want all lights out. Everybody's in his seat. Can you imagine that? Going to the rodeo, everybody's packing in, and suddenly I want the whole place still. So Bob Tallman, who is an announcer and a friend of mine, I said, can you do that? Can you stop the audience, get them all in their seats in a matter of minutes before this show, because we want the lights out? He said, yes, I can do it. And Harry Vold was the stock guy at that rodeo. And he said, what a dumb thing. Are you going to read a poem? I mean, what are you going to do? I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the lights be out. Bob will get in, run our seats, and I'm going to go, and we got a big spotlight in the middle here, and it's shining down, and I'm standing in front of the gate, and I start saying, however it starts, and then I'm going to have them open the gate in one of the chutes, and a horse is going to come out like that. And then I'm going to see a cowboy getting down on one when your guts are tickling. And then a big blast in the end. He said, these are old country boys. What? I don't get it. So I went out, and the first time it went out, and I'm doing this all by memory, of course. In those days it was there. The place was dark. And then the light shines from above to one spot. And there I am standing in front of the gate. And I said, there's 100 years of history and 100 before that, all gathered in a thinking going on beneath his hat. And back behind his eyeballs and pumping through in veins is the ghost of every cowboy that never held the reins. And it rumbles along, and suddenly I drop these ones in. Freckles Brown might pull his bull rope. Casey Tibbs might jerk the flank. Bill Pickett might be hazing when they turned the stern of the crank, plus Remington and Russell looking down his buckhorn sight, all watching through the windows of this cowboy tonight. And then the gate swings out, and this big, it was a white stallion, or bucking horse, I should say, big horse, and white. And standing in the catch pen, or in chute number 9, is the offspring of a mountain, come down from olden time, a volcano waiting quiet till they climb up on his back, rumbling like the engine of a freight train on the track. And the gate comes open, and this horse, and he looked at me. Well, it's just perfect. And then we kind of get to the end. And all the miles spent sleepy driving, all the money down the drain, all the if-I's and nearlies, all the bandage and pain, all the female tears left drying, all the fever and the fight are just a down payment on the ride he makes tonight. And then I kind of sleaze him down, and this is the last verse. When you get down to the cutting and the leather touches hide and there's nothing left to think out, he nods and sits outside. Then frozen for an instant against that open gate is history turned to flesh and blood, a warrior incarnate. And while they pose like statues in that flicker of an eye, there's something almost sacred, and you can see it if you try. It's guts and love and glory, one mortal's chance at fame. His legacy is rodeo, and Cowboy is his name. Turn him out. And it worked. And this poem has taken a life of its own. It worked there, and then had the movie. So, and then it came to the NPR, the bull riders, they got on liking it, and then, out of the clear blue, I hear the last verse, punchline, Dodge is doing. Because if you're the one guy I am, they will run you over. You got to keep pushing, and I finally did, and I said, well, why don't you give me a truck or something like that? Oh, well, you don't, you're talking with city people who are smarter than you. And so we agreed on a price, and so they paid me for 3 years. But that poem, and it's still here. It's still here. It's got 3 or 4 names.
Throughout his career, Baxter Black has written a weekly syndicated column that he calls On the Edge of Common Sense. In an early book of those columns, Baxter wrote this about some of his humorous pieces. The columns included in this section were meant to be humorous, a trip to the lunatic fringe of common sense with me as your guide. When asked to describe my column On the Edge of Common Sense, I usually say it's cowboy philosophy and poetry. Tall tales or the ravings of an out-of-work veterinary might hit closer to home. I asked Baxter to expound on what it means to live on the edge of common sense.
Have you ever known a person who would put a bottle of tequila in his belt at 10 o'clock at night in Denver, leave his apartments, and walk all the way over to Evans, drinking this tequila, and then I walked over there and I got on the freeway at Evans and got out in the middle of it, and there was a rail, in the middle, but it wasn't a real big one. It was square on the top in those days and had a post like this. And I walked all the way up, and I kept wandering, and stopping and picking up old hubcaps and all those Frisbees that said Coca-Cola, license plates from South Dakota. And I was packing them like this, and I'm going to step back. Well, you can't see it anyway. I will describe it. You have to turn your feet flat sideways when you go under one of those intersections, because that rail, it's about eight inches wide, so you have had to spread both feet to get around like this. And I kept walking, and I ran out of tequila, and I noticed I was on South Broadway. So I got off on South Broadway and walked down, and I don't want to be unreligious here, but there was a star, and it was above of this bar, and my heart was broken, and so I walked up to there, and I wound up getting into a biker's bar where they threw me out, and the story goes on now. Have you ever been arrested for abusing a stamp machine in the John Wayne Airport? Who would stand on the edge of a bunch of, if you're, when you're walking along a hill that's covered with trees or brush or stuff like that, and you go down and then you get a cutaway, so you have a road, but it's on a steep hill, so you got to cut in there. And stand on the edge of that, and you can see the tree tops below you, and do a somersault into that. For some reason, I just am not limited by good sense. Tequila helps, but I don't need it. I just do dumb things sober. Who do you think would go to Ed's party and have a great time? And he's Ed Bruce. He used to have a jerk, you call it, or for songwriters, and they always brought me to be funny. And he's a good guy. He's kind of grumpy, and all these songwriters. And he built a new grill. He was so proud of it, and I was down there. I was at the party, and I did my part, and I was having a great time. And I went to bed in the bus, just we're in his yard, but that's where I was sleeping. And got up the next morning, cheerful, and I'm walking around and go in the house, and he's fixing breakfast, but he's going. And I said, Ed, is there something wrong? 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 well, what you did last night? And I said, well, what did I do? And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean, what did I do? I went over there politely because you were holding an empty tequila bottle in your hand. And I said, here, let me take this to the kitchen. And you just tossed it over your shoulder right in my new grill. And I'm sitting there thinking, So I went out and looked and picked up the pieces. His new grill had pieces of glass all over the place, so I cleaned it all up. And now, who would do that? You know anybody that's stupid? In response, I wrote a little declaration of stupidity. Wait a minute, but there are people like this, and I guess I am one, but I know one of the guys I was riding with were horseback, and he was stupid too. And he's sitting on the back of a mule, up on his neck, and having his toddy. And the mule bucked, shot him over, and broke his neck, and he was paralyzed the rest of his life. And that was, you hang it out there, you pay the price. Living on the edge. There, but for a whim of fate, go you and I. Any man who chases lightning or thinks that he can fly. Are we stupid? Are we crazy? Are we rebels without cause? No, the reason is much simpler. We bet the pot because the drummer who keeps time for us stays just beyond the ledge, and one only hears his cadence when he's living on the edge.
When I'm interviewing someone like Baxter Black, who is closer to the end of their career than the beginning, I sometimes ask how they would like to be remembered. Before we hear Baxter's response to that question, I'd like to read a short piece of verse from Baxter's friend and hero, Carlos Ashley. This poem is entitled Epilogue. Ambition feeds 1,000 fires, whose ashes leave no ember. I pray to pen a rustic rhyme that someone will remember.
I'll say this. I don't take any of this seriously. Okay? I miss, you'd think I'd miss being able to play. And I got over it like that because I said, you can't do it anymore. Quit. Get something to do. Or, come on, just come up and tell us a little joke. I can't. I've got this bad Frank running in my head that you can hear me talking. So I'm very satisfied, or I shouldn't say satisfied, whatever it is, whatever stage in my life, I can look at it and say, well, all I told you, like I was in there looking at myself on the television program. And I can look at that and I say, that guy's kind of funny. But he's not me. And so that makes it so easy. I'm not as a deep thinker like a lot of people like you. You think about things and you let them wind up. And I don't. If something screws up, I just go on. Because I don't know what that stems from, but here was one on my tomb. You could put, he was limited in many respects, but she sure was funny. Or I got another. This is my life: riding horses, fixing cows, and making cowboys laugh. Baxter,
thanks for taking the time to do this interview, and thanks for letting me come and spend time with you here on your beautiful place.
Well, I'm sorry the pool wasn't open, but the alligators were just having eggs at this time, and they're pretty awful. Well, I'm in the midst of cutting all this stuff out, but 200 cows, that's always been in my life, and I always said, I don't ever be a rancher. I work for them. I see how hard it is. But all through my life, I've had cows, if I can get them. I've had horses, because what's life without them? But I got poems like Living in Town. And so I've been in that position too. And some of these we just make up, and I'll leave you with this. It's the truth in humor that makes it funny. That's why there's no science fiction jokes. All right, my friend, this makes old guys feel nice. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Baxter Black for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Baxter at baxterblack.com. I'd like to thank Republic Boot Company for sponsoring today's episode. You can find out more about Republic Boots at republicbootcompany.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you'd like to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for my email list at the website, and you'll get an email the very day that a new episode releases. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help me keep it going, you can make a donation on my website, or you could become a patron at patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. You could also take the time to leave a 5-star rating and review on the iTunes store, or you could simply tell a friend to listen to the show. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.